I read 6 books this month. Only 4 of them were on my TBR. Hey gang, welcome back to Grace's Book Place. I'm Grace and this is my book place. Just like a heads up, if you can hear any background noise, talking, Caleb is upstairs tutoring, teaching some Hades and Persephone, our problematic faves. So yeah, might be able to hear him banging on about that upstairs, but hopefully not too much. In the month of October, Caleb helped me out with my TBR. He basically picked it off of prompts, may or may not have fit, I don't know. I cannot remember what the prompts were that he went. I probably should have checked that. But yeah, I aim to read 6 books. I have read 6 books, so in that way, I am a success. However, 2 of the books that I read were not ones that Caleb picked for that TBR. So we're just gonna go with it. Yeah, it is what it is. First book that I read in October was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This was not on my TBR, but I've been banging on since the very first. Was it the first one? No, but one of the first videos I made, the end of year tag, I think, or whatever. But I have been banging on about how I wanted to read this. I've had it for ages, never got around to reading it. So I just picked it up because I was bored of waiting. I read this one in October, and I enjoyed it. I technically buddy read it with Ali. We were reading it at the same time. This is, if you don't know, a book about a vampire and a book club. Description done. So this is set in the 80s and it's the idea of housewives, stay-at-home mums going up against a Ted Bundy type vampire thing. This is filled with men not listening to women and underestimating women. Very stressful to read. There's a particular bit. If you've read this book, then you've had to read through chapter 21. And chapter 21 is hard to read. We should form a support group for people who have read chapter 21 of this book, because there are 0 decent men in this book. I mean, there's a potential for a couple, but they're either like children or we don't know them. So it's hard to read for most of it. But that's kind of the point. Like, obviously, I think Grady Hendrix' point in this book is that, like, how women every day, in everyday scenarios, and obviously remember this is set in the 80s, so he's talking about sort of a culture that surrounded his own mother and what he grew up seeing and all of this stuff. So it might not 100% connect to today, though there's definitely like these sort of behaviours and prejudices and, you know, sexism and stuff all obviously is still a thing. This is very much supposed to be like in defence of these women, sort of reflecting a mirror back at some of the ways in which people that sentence is hard, in some of the ways in which people dismiss these women. I had a good time. It wasn't, I think because I've been wanting to read it for so long and I sort of built it up in my head, it wasn't everything I wanted it to be. But I don't know if it could have been because I was waiting so long. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good time. I had a good time. It was fun. And I liked a lot of the things it was saying. It's not the best horror/thriller book I've ever read, but that's fine. It's still pretty good. There was like one scene in the house. That scene, like, and it's quite early on as well, so it's kind of a shame that you don't really get anything, in my opinion, as good spooky as that for the rest. But if you know, if you've read, then the scene in the house, like the hands and yeah, say no more. Good time. Glad I read it. The next book that I read in October was on my TBR, and it was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I believe that Caleb put this one on for feminist book, not knowing, he just guessed. And he was correct. What a good time. Everybody loves this book. Everybody's been banging on about this book forever. And I'm glad I finally got around to it. This is the first Taylor Jenkins read that I've ever read, and it did not disappoint. It was a good time. I didn't love it in the way that I've seen some people love Taylor Jenkins read, but I think that's because I haven't read like the big ones like Daisy Jones and the Six, and more recently Malibu Rising, which everybody is obsessed with. But this is obviously like a big one of hers that people still really love, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very good. It was very moving. I really loved looking into Evelyn Hugo's life. I thought the insights into that time, into like the commentary on Hollywood and I guess homophobia and sexism and like all of that stuff was really interesting. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was very cool, and I liked the characters. I will say that I found the twist somewhat lacking or lackluster. For anyone who hasn't read it, this isn't necessarily a spoiler. Like, the very first chapter is from the perspective of the woman who is interviewing Evelyn Hugo, and she's been asked specifically, so Evelyn Hugo wants her specifically to interview her, to do this like big interview thing, and she doesn't know why, because they've never met. So all the way through the book, you're asking that question. Like, that's what you're waiting for. You're waiting to find out why. When we do find out why, I had some... It didn't hit me in the way that I wanted it to. I wanted it to be this big thing, and like, don't get me wrong, I didn't guess it. I didn't guess what it was. So I was like, oh, okay, like, I didn't figure that out. That's cool. But I think it was less the reveal and more the way in which the emotions were handled afterwards. Like, it's the way in which the main character, or our interviewer, what's her name? Monique Grant. The way in which Monique Grant was written was pretty chill for the majority of this book, because it was obviously Evelyn Hugo telling her story, and Monique Grant occasionally popping in with like questions and conversation points and stuff like that. The way she was written after the reveal wasn't convincing for me personally, but then again, I wouldn't say it's just like not a good portrayal, because everybody reacts differently to certain things, and someone else might really relate to the way that was written. But for me, it just didn't. I didn't believe the reactions were. It just didn't feel that realistic to me, or it wasn't delved into enough for me to really want to be like, okay, I understand why this character thinks this way. But apart from that one note, the rest of it was really great. Like, I loved all of the flashback stuff, all of basically my favourite stuff was just seeing Evelyn Hugo's past. That was wonderful, so I really enjoyed that one. The next book that I read in the month of October was The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. Can we please have a moment for this book? This is my favourite book of October. It is a contender for potentially favourite book of the year, but at this point I can't tell if my reserving the top spot for Cersei is genuinely because Cersei was so amazing, which it was, but if it's that, or if it's just that the nostalgia or like current me is clinging on to that. But this is up there for me. I adored this. It wasn't what I was expecting it to be at all, and I'm not mad at it. So this is a thriller, and all you really need to know is that it's based, like, three lighthouse keepers on a lighthouse in the sea. So, you know, no connection to the land. They're just in a lighthouse. They all go missing, and the door is locked from the inside. And we don't know what happened. This book is great. I loved basically everything about it. I thought it was so interesting, so fascinating. I didn't know going into it that it was literary fiction, which would have been handy to know, I think, but wasn't that big of a deal because, you know, it's not that hard once you be like, okay, this is what this is, switching your brain into that mode. But don't be fooled, for me personally, I still got the spooks, the shivers at the end of this book when some things are being revealed to you and some things are happening and you're like, is this real? Is this not real? What is happening? I read it in one night, I think. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Most of my books are read in one sleepless night, so I lose track. But I think this is one of the ones that I just sat and read in one night. And it's not a great idea to read it in the dark when you get to that bit, because I think Caleb did pick this actually for the thriller prompt when we did our TBR, and I was at the time like really in the mood for spooky thrillery stuff, so I'm really glad that this like delivered a little bit on that at the end, because I loved reading it. Like, I loved it all the way through. I really enjoyed this book, and it's one of my top 10, I'm gonna say, of the year at least, but I will hold off on that because I'll probably share my top 10 at some point. But I really loved it. It's a new fave, and I'm just glad like that at the end it had a little bit of a thing that made me go, ooh, made me look around my dark room and be like, ghosts? Yeah, I enjoyed that. It was really good. It's told in a really interesting way as well. These men disappeared off of this lighthouse with no explanation years ago, and a man has decided, like a famous writer or whatever, has decided he's going to interview the wives and partners and people that they left behind to try and put together an idea of what may have happened to them. So you come into this story as this writer comes to conduct these interviews and hear everyone's side of the story. But you never once hear the interviewer talk. It's all from the perspective of the people he's interviewing. Some of them are like in first person and they're saying, authors are meant to be open-minded, aren't they? Well, let's see. You'll remember I told you about Bill's bad feeling, like that kind of thing. Like, it's like they're answering the questions, and you never once hear the interviewer talk. You just hear them reacting to his perceived facial expressions or questions he potentially asked. You just hear their responses. You never hear him speak. You never learn his name. You never really get like that much information about him at all. So it's all just from solely these like women's perspectives, and then interspersed are first person perspectives from before the lighthouse keepers went missing, of those lighthouse keepers and what they're doing on the lighthouse, like in the lighthouse. So you're hearing all of the like people who were left behind or lost them, or all of the family talking about what they think happened, what was going on behind the scenes, any extra information in these interviews, and then you're seeing literally what happened, or the build up to what happened from the perspective of the men on the actual lighthouse. It's very cool, and I really enjoyed it, and I was very impressed. I don't know if I was expecting to love it as much as I did, but I'm so glad that I did. This was by far my favourite book of October. Moving on. The next book that I read was an unexpected bonus. I have been reading The Song of Achilles for so long now, like literally months, because I was reading it with Ali, and as I've mentioned before, Ali lives in America, I live in England, and so we were reading this out loud to each other whenever we could like find a spare hour or so, where we have the time and like someone wasn't asleep or at work or whatever. And unexpectedly in October, Ali was like, hey, I have some time, you want to finish this? And we did. Thank goodness that's finally done, because as much as I really like this book, it was getting a bit frustrating just having it there and not being able to just tick it off and say it's done. I really liked Song of Achilles. I know that Song of Achilles is a lot of people's baby. So I don't want to say anything that might upset anyone, but I didn't love it as much as I hoped I would, and that's sad for me because Cersei was fantastic. It obviously makes sense that Cersei might be technically better, just not from a personal like taste standpoint, but just from the writing style and the execution, because this was Miller's debut and Circe came later. So it makes sense that there may have been some technical improvements upon the writing or the way in which the story was told, so that factor that in. I think this book was a bit of a victim of the way in which Ali and I were reading it. I think when we talked about it, we both sort of had a moment of because we've taken so many gaps, we've lost so much. I think we both would usually just sit and read this over either in one sitting or over a couple of days, and so you get all of the full impact and the emotional whirlwind that is this story. And it didn't quite happen because we had big breaks in between, so you're coming into it fresh, not with all of that built up tension and emotion that you would have had if you'd have read it all together. It's not a fair review from that perspective, I think, because how I would usually take in a book to have a really genuine sort of feeling about it would be reading it quicker than that, at least. Greek retellings and Greek mythology in general are hard. We romanticize Greek mythology a lot, and I understand why, and I'm guilty of it. I love Percy Jackson, I love Lore Olympus, I love all of these things that take Greek mythology because it's cool and turn it into this awesome thing for us to take in anew and everything. But the fact of the matter is that the original stories are full of horrible stuff and arrogant men predominantly, and just problematic behaviour. And one of my favourite things about Miller is that she doesn't shy away from that. It's one of the reasons why I loved Circe, because it felt like she dived a bit more in that one into, hey, these aren't good people, gods, things. They're we shouldn't adore them in the way that we do, but also because they're gods and goddesses, there is an element of them that we can't help but adore a little bit because they are elevated above us by definition of what they are, and they have different natures to us and all of this. All of that's discussed way better in my opinion in Circe than in this, but this still has it, and from our perspective it was a bit hard. I think I found it a little bit easier to be sympathetic towards Achilles at the end, maybe just because my brain leans classically and to understanding, for the purposes of the story, he's half god, he's got these things, there's a prophecy, this is what the culture is, all of this stuff. But understandably, Ali was he sucks. The whole story of Troy is just arrogance and shallowness and sexism and also selfishness on everyone's part. So it's not a fun story to read around anyway in that sense, or it is, but you have to be aware of all the stuff. But we love Patroclus, we stand Patroclus, Patroclus is king. It was a good time. I do think this was a good book, I want to make that clear. I had a really good time reading it. There were bits that really got me. I tabbed, you can't really see my tabs very well, but I tabbed some stuff, some hard-hitting moments. I'm a big fan of dialogue, so the things that you will mostly see tabbed are bits of dialogue that hit me in the chest or get the tear ducts welling. At least it got tabbed, a couple of these didn't. I'm glad that Ali unexpectedly was hey, let's finish this, or I would have read 5 books this month instead of 6. So, cheaty? Maybe. Do I care? No. The next book that I read was The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. It was a slow going thing, unexpectedly. I am a self-proclaimed fantasy reader and I read books in one sitting, which is not a mandatory thing you have to do, and it's perfectly valid if you read differently. But I just had a moment of crises, identity crisis with this, because this is everything I love in a fantasy book. It's got great social commentary, it's got great characters, it's got a really interesting magic system, it's got people on the run and mystery and twists. And it took me a couple of weeks to make myself read it, and I don't know why. It might have just been a general reading slump. It might have been because this book is very hard-hitting, but I like that usually, so I don't know. But either way, this is a great book. I'm not going to say too much about it here because I've vlogged about it. Hopefully you'll watch that one to hear more about what I think. But I really enjoyed it, and I wasn't aware it was a trilogy, so bring on the next 2 when I have money and can afford more books. I was moved to tears in the first 10 pages of this book, and that's all you really need to know. The final book that I read in October was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book is fascinating from a philosophical standpoint, in my opinion. I don't want to go into too much detail about this either, because this is also featured in the same vlog as the 5th season, but I enjoyed it a lot. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. I don't know if I should say too much, but I think you just see the cover and you think a certain way. It's got like quotes from Madeline Miller on the back, and I just think that incorrectly or accidentally gives potential readers the impression that this is gonna be like Circe or Song of Achilles. It is nothing like Circe or Song of Achilles. It is, in my opinion, not even similar in themes, bar some small things. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to spoil things. This was a good time. My mum read it before I did. She really enjoyed it. She thought it was weird when she was reading it, and then she was like, afterwards, she was like, no, I really enjoyed that. And then I read it and really enjoyed it, and then Ali read it, and she was all like, what is happening? And then she was like, I really enjoyed it. So it's weird. It's unexpected. Nobody I know, and those are the only people I know who've read it, but none of them so far have been like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I thought it was going to be. Like, it's unexpected. It's weird and unexpected, and that's all I can say. But I feel like the beauty of this book is more in its concepts and greater discussion than in specific written moments that are going to be like emotional or whatever. Like, it's already sparked a big discussion between myself and Ali about like, what is it really saying? And we disagree on that, but that's fine because both of our interpretations are valid. And it's really interesting that we both got very different messages out of this book. So if you have read this book, I was going to say put what you thought it was saying in the comments, but like put like spoiler warnings if you're going to do that. But I am very intrigued to see what people got from this, or if they got anything at all. Like, you might have hated it, which is fine too. Hallelujah. Those are the books that I read in October. I read 6 books. Like, I aimed to read 6 books. I read 6 books. 2 of them were not the original ones. As of yet, I do not have my finalized like TBR game system thing set up. So you decide in the comments down below if I need to like do a forfeit challenge type thing. I don't know, you decide if you think that should count, or if the fact that I didn't finish Name of the Wind or Dune in time is not in my favor. So let me know about that. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you loved them, if you hated them, if you agree, disagree with anything I've said. This is a safe space, and I am literally inviting the conversation. So, there's no wrong answers. I mean, there are some wrong answers, but there are many correct answers. So whatever you thought, let me know. It'd be great if you could go ahead and like and subscribe. That really helped me out. Thank you for hanging out with me in my book place, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye.